How does climate change affect women in Africa?
Climate change is caused by the most industrialized nations of this world, but Africa today is affected by effects of climate change the most. And within Africa, the people who are mostly affected by the effects of climate change are women, because women bear the brunt of agriculture in this country, and therefore, in this continent, and therefore, if there is any change or degradation in the environment, it's them who suffer the most impacts of climate change. When climate change causes catastrophes, like the recent cyclones in Southern Africa, in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, the cyclones Idai and Kenneth, the casualties are put at 1,000 deaths, but which is a very conservative picture figure according to me. However, of that figure, the majority of those casualties or survivors or victims are women, pregnant women, women living with disability, and women in general who couldn't run or climb onto rooftops and wait for rescue. So women suffer the most in this continent from climate change.
And what needs to be done, and by whom, to reduce the vulnerabilities women face in as far as climate change is concerned?
First of all, we need to look at the gendered impacts of climate change, those impacts on women. First of all, we need to look at issues of food security and land use. Here, women who bear the brunt of agriculture in this country and food production or do not own the land. The fertile land is always reserved for men. So women struggle a lot to be able to produce food for their families and also food for the market. So that is one area that we need to look at, that women have access to land, access to credit, access to finances. The next one is health. Women's health. Women are mostly affected by indoor pollutions because women in Africa use cow dung or firewood to cook, and they spend most of the time inside cooking, and that really affects their health. So that's also another area where we need to look at. When you look at sexual and reproductive health services, when there is climate change, these services are greatly affected because infrastructure is destroyed, people are in the move, and it affects services being on sexual and reproductive health being provided to women. And the next area that we need to look at is cultural and stereotypes, because we live in a society whereby women are relegated in the second position, second place, because of stereotypes and because of patriarchy in our societies. And this also needs to be addressed because they really affect women, especially at times of climate impacts. Then we have to look at issues also like mobility. When for example, the cyclones happen, people move, and as people move, women included, women encounter a lot of difficulties that include sexual harassment, rapes, all kinds of harmful things that happen to them when they are in the move. And when they are in centers of rescues, or they are in refugee camps, or if they are in IDP camps, they are the ones who suffer a lot from sexual harassments because they move from their areas as a result of climate change. And they do not report these things because they feel very embarrassed, very ashamed to report the things that happen to them. Other areas that we need to address are issues of women rights, climate change defenders, the activists. These are women who really stand for the protection of the ecosystems, but they run into trouble with governments, with multinationals, with the private sector. Because their role is to defend communities that are being evicted or that are being they are suffering, they are at the front line of climate change, but then they get into trouble. And we don't need even to go far for an example. We have our own Wangari Maathai, who went through a lot with the government of Kenya as a result of her human rights activities to defend communities and to defend our environment. to address these issues, we need all stakeholders, the communities themselves. We need also governments to get to up their act. We also need the private sector to look at this. The donors, the multinationals, every stakeholder as a responsibility in addressing these issues of climate change that end up impacting on women the most. For governments, we really need targeted policies that target women, especially those that are at the front line of climate change. We need social protection services for women. We also need compensations when women are impacted by climate change, when their properties are destructed because they were on the move because of catastrophes. Governments need to compensate women for these kinds of things. For the international community, we need the funding. They did promise us that there will be funding to address issues of climate change, but up to now, since the Paris Agreement, we have not seen any funding, substantial funding coming to the global south. Thank you.